Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're doing good and well. So it's time for me to count down my top 10 albums of 2015, and I've got a few honourable mentions to get through first as well. But before I start my list, you might be wondering, well, why are you doing 2015 all of a sudden? We've just had everybody's end of year list for 2023. Why in the middle of January decide to do a top 10 albums list of 2015? Well, there is a reason for that. There is a reason to the madness. I do have a playlist, and a while back I did start going through my end of year list countdowns, and I was working my way back through each year from the year end list of that time, which was my 2021 list, and I got back as far as 2016. That's why I'm now doing my top 10 albums of 2015, because it's a year I've simply not tackled yet. And I hope none of you're not feeling too sick of year-end lists. Otherwise, maybe you don't want to watch this video because you've had so many lists, you're still catching up on all the albums you've missed from the year we've just had. But the thing I want to stress is 2015 was an incredible year. It was absolutely brilliant. And, you know, not exaggerating either here, because I think it was the sort of musical jackpot, because you had lots of bands. Lots of bands have been around for a long time, releasing, for me, some of their best material ever, as well as new bands coming through, putting out some really great albums as well. So for me personally, it was like a musical jackpot. Let me know in the comments what you think of 2015. I think it certainly stands out in my year-end lists for the 2010s decade as being one of the best, if not the best. Every one of these top 10 albums I'm going to be going through could be an album of the year in a different year. That's the standard we're talking about for 2015. Anyway, enough talk. Let me crack on with my 2015 list. First of all, with the honourable mentions though. My first honourable mention is David Gilmour's Rattle That Lock, and I kind of wanted to shout out this album because I think it's already been somewhat forgotten about since it came out in 2015. I tend to prefer David's solo works over Roger's as well. I just think the two are so different, to be fair, as artists. They're very, very different with what they try to achieve. And I personally always like David Gilmour's slightly more melodic, moody albums to Roger's more sort of outspoken and bold and brash albums, personally. And I really enjoy this album. It's very evocative. It's got even an absolutely beautiful tribute track to the late Rick Wright on this album called A Boat Lies Waiting, and that is part of the reason actually I wanted to shout out this album, just because of one song. But the rest of the album I think is really quite good as well, with the title track Rattle That Lock on here. Faces of Stone is a great song I think as well. Lots of good stuff on here. Solid album, and one I just feel has been slightly forgotten about from that year that I personally wanted to give a mention to. So that's David Gilmour, Rattle That Lock as the first honourable mention. Next up I've got Queensryche with Conditioned Human as my second honourable mention from that year. Really great, this album, with Todd La Torre now as their singer from in 2015, and they were really reinvigorated I think when he started in the band as the new vocalist. And this second album, really solid, really good songs. I love Guardian, Toxic Remedy, and the Hourglass song. Just another really good album from that year. Again, maybe has been slightly forgotten about, but a lot of these Todd La Torre albums show Queensryche are in a rich vein of form and continue to just put out really good albums. So let's hope the next album from Queensryche, whenever we get that, is also really great. Next up, I've got a dream pop album from Tamarin called Crane Kiss. This is really reminiscent of those Cocteau Twins albums, those old Cocteau Twins albums, I think. And it's really lush, it's really rich in its electronic sounds and textures. I think it's got a lot of really good hooks in this album. Definitely one for you, those of you that like shoegaze and dream pop and everything in between. This is a really solid album from Tamarin from 2015. My next honourable mention is actually a bit sneaky for me to include this, because I didn't discover this in 2015. In fact, I only really discovered this album last year. It's an album by Serenia called The Seventh Life Path, that I realised is also a callback to their Gothic albums, their first two Gothic albums in particular, as it does reintroduce much more of a Gothic sound. And you've got Aileen doing her last album with the band here as well. And like I say, I'm pretty new to Serenia, and I was brand new to this album last year, so it's a bit sneaky to throw this into this list, even as an honourable mention. But I really love this album. I think it's got a great sound. It's pretty big sounding, still having lots of the symphonic elements in it, but like I say, it's just got a darker gothic style to it that I really like, and you know, lots of cool moments on this album. So I wanted to give this one an honourable mention as well. My next and final honourable mention is by Paradise Lost, The Plague Within. And they come back here with, again, an album which is reminiscent of an older style from the band, and more of a death doom style album here. But it's done with so much unerring conviction. It's almost like, you know, the band sounding totally fresh with this release, and it's a brilliant album from the band. I'm surprised it's not quite made my top 10. There are just 10 albums I think I enjoy a little more than this, but you know, those of you that love death doom metal and doom metal may well want to check out this Paradise Lost album if you haven't before. It's a really kind of really interesting and evocative release from Paradise Lost. So that gets us through the honourable mentions. Finally, we get to the top 10. Now, my number 10 is Amorphis and Under the Red Clouds. A great album that's only at number 10, and one of my favourite Amorphis albums as well, it has to be said, and that's again just showing you the standard of the year that was 2015. So many bangers on this album. I find the first half of this album is particularly spectacular, with Tommy Jutson delivering some absolutely uplifting and just booming vocals that are frankly amazing from him, and some of my favourite Tommy moments are probably on this album, and Tommy choruses as well. Yeah, for me the first half of the album is just incredible. The second half's still good, but yeah, great album from that year from Amorphis. My favourite tracks include The Four Wise Ones, Death of the King, and White Knight. My number 9 album is Draconian's Sovereign. The first album they did with Heike Langens as singer, and arguably their best ever album for me. This is great songwriting on here, I think. I think it sounds really beautiful. I liked Heike's fit for the band Draconian, even though I was a big fan of Lisa as well. It just felt like Heike was such a natural fit for the band, particularly at this time. It just seemed to work, and also perhaps reinvigorate Draconian in some way, because the album that came before this I really wasn't very keen on. So what a way to come into this band for Heike and to deliver an album that is as good as Sovereign. Incredible album. I really love Dusk Mariner and Dishearten, and earlier on the album you've got The Wretched Tide, which is another song I like, but I think towards the end of this album it's got some incredible songs, and that's my number 9, Draconian's Sovereign. Now, my number 8, and sadly again, this is an album which feels like it should be much higher, but it's at number 8, is the Black Dahlia Murder with Abysmal. Instrumentally, you've got just the guitar work on this album from Brian Eschbach and Ryan Knight is just phenomenal guitar work. Obviously, Trevor as well, doing his great growling and vocals, and you know, it's sad that we no longer have him with us to continue with Black Dahlia Murder. I'm waiting to see what the new singer's like, to be honest. I haven't checked out anything they've done recently, if they have done anything recently with a new singer. But this album, Abysmal, is anything but abysmal. It's fantastic. Really great album. I love Receipt, Refaced, and The Advent on this album. That's my number 8, Black Dahlia Murder with Abysmal. My number 7, again, I'm surprised this is only at number 7, is Baroness with their Purple album. And this very much followed on in the vein of Yellow and Green for me, in a sense, but it also brought back a little bit, a taster of their earlier records, like the Blue record and the Red one, the Red album, from their earlier outputs. But it blended those together in a more accessible and immediate way. And Purple is actually possibly my favourite Baroness album, because it's stuck with me, you know, since 2015. It's really stuck with me, and I've been back to it a ton. So actually, out of all the Baroness albums, it's probably my most played album, even though you could argue they have more interesting and intricate records, certainly from their earlier years. But Purple, I just love this album, and it's my number 7, Baroness, Purple. Next up at number 6, we've got Enslaved and In Times, the progressive black metal giants. You know, how many times have I spoken about Enslaved on this channel? I've done a ranking for them. They seem to come up every year. They release an album, and 2015 is no different. And it's criminal as well that this album's not in the top 5 and it's only number 6. The part of this album I really love is everything from Building with Fire through to, I think it's the title track. It's just absolute gold. This album is just Enslaved, thriving in their newer, more prog rock influenced years, but doing so with absolute aplomb and conviction. And In Times is a record you need to check out. If you're familiar with Enslaved, you've not yet listened to In Times, get to this album, particularly if you like their prog years, or I'd say their prog years, but they're more prog adjacent or prog-centric years, then you need to listen to In Times by Enslaved. Now we're into the top 5, and again, I get to number 5 and I think, why isn't this album of the year? What my favourite album from this band. This is Ghost's Meliora, an album with just banger after banger songs. Whatever you think of Ghost, I think the songwriting on this album is absolutely top notch. Tobias just knows how to do catchy but authentic music in Ghost, I think. And for me, this is peak Ghost. This has everything I love about Ghost. It still has their gothic style, still their doomy style, but it still also has that great songwriting as well, and just really interesting moments in that. I love this album. I love going back to it. As I say, whether you love or hate Ghost, I think this album is absolutely brilliant, and it's my number 5, Ghost's Meliora. Now, at number 4, we have another absolutely incredible album, and this time from a band that, I discovered that year, I think. So Sylosis. This is Sylosis with Dormant Heart. For me, one of the most underrated albums in metal of all time, this album. And the fact it's above the likes of the Ghost album and the Enslaved album says a lot about how much I regard Dormant Heart by Sylosis. I love the way the album's crafted. It's very stirring and moody to begin with, but then it gets more into thrashier territory, which I personally really like the way that the album's structured and gets into that. I like that it's kind of moody to begin with, and then surprises you with some thrashier, faster cuts later on. Also brings in Josh Middleton's stunning guitar work. Oftentimes in this album, you just get some absolutely mind-bogglingly brilliant guitar solos. My favourite songs on Sylosis, Dormant Hearts, probably the title track, Leech, and Callous Souls, and bringing in a certain amount of emotion as well to Dormant Heart. So I personally absolutely love Dormant Heart. Let me know how you regard that Sylosis album. I know I've got some Sylosis fans sub to the channel, so let me know what you think of this Sylosis album, Dormant Heart, from 2015. I personally think it's a great album from them, and very, very underrated. Next up, I have got a gigantic doom metal album from that year. In fact, so gigantic, it was 3 discs. It was 3 albums in one. It was Swallow the Sun, Songs from the North 1, 2, and 3. Now, an album this long surely doesn't have the right to be this good. You'd surely be bored. But in my case, I can actually listen to these 3 albums pretty much all at once. Although I'll be honest and say I usually dip into one of them at a time. I don't tend to sit through all 3 because it's a massive sitting of time. But that said, there's just so much beauty. I mean, there's Gloom and Despair. That's actually the name of the 3 discs. Disc 1 is Gloom, Disc 2 is Beauty, and Disc 3 is Despair. But the album flows pretty nicely together. It's very, very sad sounding, but always beautiful to listen to. My personal favourite disc is probably the first one, because I think it combines their really beautiful melodic elements with the harsher elements, and does so in only the way Swallow the Sun can achieve, with this really just fantastic epic sound that they have as a doom metal band. Love all the Alea Stonebridge moments as well. Another person I'd say, is an awful loss for the metal community. She was just so brilliant in Swallow the Sun, I think, as well as in her solo works. Swallow the Sun 1, 2, and 3 is my number 3. I cannot believe that album is not number 1. But then I realised what my top 2 albums are from 2015. My number 2 is Steven Wilson, Hand Cannot Erase. My favourite album from his solo efforts, and also one of my all-time favourite albums that made it onto my top 40 albums of all time list. So the fact this is at number 2 will come as no surprise. It may be more surprising that it's not actually my number 1 album of 2015, because I absolutely adore this album from Steven. It's so very him, but it's so professionally done. It flows so beautifully as a concept. It works. It has so many great songs. My personal favourites are Hand Cannot Erase, Routine and Ancestral, but everything on here is just full of star quality moments. And yeah, this is an amazing record that I had, I remember talking about with Mary's Music Taste recently when we went through his solo albums, and I think this album was both of our #1 choices. So yeah, amazing album, Hand Cannot Erase from 2015 from Stephen Wilson, which leaves my #1 album. An album that I've mentioned on the channel a few times before, and because it's not a metal album, you may not be familiar with it if you're a metal fan on the channel, and that is Pink's Shiny Ultra Blast and Everything Else Matters. This is a shoegaze band, very underground shoegaze band, I think, that perhaps only if you're a shoegaze lover you would know about. And this album is so authentic to me. Yes, it is very identifiably shoegaze, but the elements that come together that make it that, for me, are kind of a little different from your standard run-of-the-mill shoegaze albums. And there are so many magic, euphoric moments packed into this album. You get sort of all these sort of hurried, beautiful sounding reverb-laden guitars, and that combines with a sort of really groovy bass element to the album as well, and gorgeous melodies and melodic vocal moments from the singer that are very ghostly and often so faint that you do they feel more like they are an accompanying sort of breeze to the album rather than being a central focus of it. But it all works together so well. The album just has a gorgeous sound. And the reason this album is my #1 is because it's one of my all-time favourite albums, again, like the Stephen Wilson album, but it sticks out to me in my memory because it really impacted me like not even any of these other top 10 albums did, because I just found it, to me, it felt like nothing I'd heard before. And it was so impactful, and I absolutely loved it so much and still do. And out of all these albums, probably this one is the most played of all of them. So that's my #1 album of 2015. I implore you, if you're a shoegaze fan and you haven't listened to Pink Shiny Ultra Blast, Everything Else Matters, then go check that one out now. Thanks everyone for watching this video. Do drop a like and a sub if you enjoyed my countdowns and my lists. I'm doing lots of lists at the moment in January, and I will be resuming album reviews more often as well soon. So look out for those. Until next time anyway, everybody have a great weekend, and bye for now.